and welcome. You're tuned in to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. That guy over there, Tim Dennis. How are you, Tim?
Doing great.
We got a good show for us lined up today. You know, it's always a treasure when we're able to get this guy on the air with us. He's a world traveler. He is an explorer extraordinaire. He is the guy that if the shit's going to hit the fan, you want him guiding your boat down the Nile River at that time, Tim. That's all I want to tell you. Plus,
other than Cleopatra, yeah.
Yeah, no, she didn't end so well. Josh Gates is the guy I'd still want to stick with. Josh Gates, host and explorer on Expedition Unknown on Discovery Channel Wednesdays, just wrapped up another successful season, and he is back with us. And today I wanted to focus on a couple of these final episodes of his series because of his breakdown of the Bermuda Triangle. So we've invited him back for that. Josh Gates, welcome back to the program. Thanks for being here, sir.
Gentlemen, pleasure to be here, as always.
I gotta tell you this in all honesty, man. You know, aside from just being your buddy and loving you that way, I sincerely love your show.
Wait, what way? What way do you love me? Oh, okay.
You know, mostly heterosexual, if that's okay. Mostly.
Mostly.
But, dude, your shows bring such a light to me, man. I love your sense of humor, the intelligence you bring to these programs. It's unlike any other program out there. And I hope that Expedition Unknown continues until you're 89 years old, like Harrison Ford doing another Indiana Jones movie.
I hope it doesn't, but I hope it goes on for a good long while. 89, I'll be ready to have a drink in my hand. But yes, I really appreciate the kind words, man. That's really nice of you to say.
It is. It's the way you weave in your humor. Never feels forced or awkward. It's always so beautifully interwoven into the episodes, and I got to tell you, you deliver great laughs during a couple moments in the Bermuda Triangle episodes that I enjoyed a lot. But you had another great season. We'll get into the Bermuda Triangle in a few moments here, but for you, digging into these stories, I know it's something personal as somebody with a degree in archaeology and a world traveler. You really are fascinated by this. This isn't just a paycheck to you. You really get off on the history and the exploration of these sites. As you look back at this last season, what stands out most to you as something that just kind of, even in this day and age, just has blown you away?
Yeah, well, these seasons take a long time to shoot, first of all. We typically make about 20 shows per season, and they typically divide them up into two groupings of 10. So they'll air 10 shows, and the show goes away for a while, and then it comes back for another 10. So, we've been filming this season that just finished airing since, over a year. So when I look back at the season, the first thing is it's just a blur, right? Because we have gone to so many places over the last year in this season. I think for me there are a few episodes that really stood out. We did a really difficult expedition to the Dyatlov Pass in Siberia, which is a story I'm sure that I think you and I even talked about. But this distant campground mountain slope in Siberia where these hikers died very mysteriously 60 years ago. Really remote place, and certainly of all shows we've done, one of the hardest places to get to. I mean, go to Moscow, then fly for another 5 or 6 hours, then take another flight, then get snowmobiles, then take days in the backcountry. I mean, it was just really out there. So, that show was really fascinating because the story is just so mysterious, and it was just such a thrill to be able to go there. So that's one that really sticks out for me. And I think also our big 2-part special we did at the beginning of the second half of the season on the secret to D-Day in Normandy in France was another big favorite, just because it was just such an honor to be able to visit some of these sites and to dig into some of the real work that's still happening to document this pivotal moment in modern history.
Dyatlov Pass, obviously, and we've covered that on our show repeatedly over the years because it's so weird and so fascinating a story. And there's been so many different theories bandied around, from Bigfoot to secret Russian experiments going on to freezing madness. When you go back and examine a case like this, where these hikers meet their end in such a bizarre and traumatic way. What is your takeaway going back all those years later, walking those same miles, being put into those historic sites and kind of absorbing that history itself?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing that really struck me in actually going there is how capable these kids really were. You know, they were young, but they were very capable outdoors people. Certainly a lot more capable than me. I mean, we have the benefit today of things like snowmobiles and 21st century technology, synthetic clothing. I mean, these guys had leather boots and, you know, I mean, they were making homemade cross-country skis. So the fact that they took an expedition like this and were out in the backcountry, and it's not their first time being out in the backcountry, and they were so comfortable there. I mean, it speaks, I think, a lot to life in Siberia in general. The people who live there are extremely capable, right? I mean, this is like living in one of the harshest environments in the world. So I think going there really was an education in the fact that these kids were not irresponsible, inexperienced. I mean, they knew what they were doing. But I think the other thing it really illustrated for me is that it's easy to look at their case and to think and to jump to conclusions, right? Because it seems like we have a lot of data. We have these extensive diaries from them. Each of them kept a personal diary and also had a group diary that they worked on every day. They also had a ton of photographs from the expedition. You know, they had multiple cameras out there, and a lot of that film was recovered and developed. So at first glance, you sort of think, wow, we have a lot of information here. But what we critically don't have is really any information about the last day of their lives. You know, there is no diary entry. There are no photographs of what they were going through. And then we have these really macabre, you know, kind of autopsy reports and these really mysterious reports of how the tent was found. But you got to remember, this is 60 years ago, and the bodies, only half of them were really found early on. The rest weren't recovered until spring, and they were badly decomposed at that point. And so I think a lot of the really gruesome details, some of them were missing their eyes and their tongue. I mean, that's true, but they also had been face down in you know, river melt for an extended period of time. So some of those injuries are not as weird as they seem. But I think when you really look at it and you see that we have no information from the most critical time, I think it's one of those things that really led me to ultimately believe that we just don't know enough to be able to say anything for sure. I mean, I think there is an X factor here that we don't know about. I think if I was like a betting man, I would say that an extreme weather event of some kind got the better of them. You know, I have a hard time imagining that they ran into people out there. The idea that they witnessed a missile test and this, I mean, it's just so remote. Is it possible? Sure. I mean, there were military installations that were, I mean, not far as the crow flies, but there's no roads and stuff out there, you know. So I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, like when an airplane crashes, more often than not, it's a cascade failure, right? Which means that it's not one thing that goes wrong. It's like a series of things that cascade forward, and then you can't recover. So there may have been a cascade failure here. You know, something may have happened that caused them to have to leave the tent. Part of the tent collapsed. Someone got sick. So, I mean, just something we can't even really imagine. Just something that seems benign. And that led to one bad decision and another, and before you know it, maybe they all ended up outside that tent in a blinding blizzard, and they couldn't find their way back. You know, so I think that's possible, and it may be the most likely scenario, but I think there isn't enough information to ever really know for sure.
Yeah, it was so bizarre, and you know, you hear from the outside, kind of looking at some of the injuries, and they said that the impact injuries, you know, skin was not broken, but it was like a car traveling at 50 miles an hour hit a few of these people. That was the force. Yep. And right. You feel like, oh my God, is it some kind of, you know, sonic weapon? But like you said, it most likely was a weather condition, perhaps an avalanche, something that came suddenly, hit them hard, and left them in this position. Well, Dave, what about that they're out there running around without any clothes on? They were obviously terrified out. You know, a lot of people don't realize that in extreme cold, your body will react a different way. You'll actually start feeling feverish and burning up, and they'll remove clothing because they're trying to cool themselves down, and it may force them out of their tent. There are still some very strange aspects, but you don't know the mental acuity of what they were like at that point, and what were they facing?
Yeah, I mean, the where their bodies were found, the way that they were found, the injuries they sustained, it's really weird. You just can't get around any of it. It's just, people will tell you, anyone who's spent time out in conditions like this will tell you, you don't leave your tent. You just don't. If the tent collapses on you, you don't leave your tent. You know what I mean? You just try to kind of rebuild it, and you stay with it, and you certainly don't walk out without your shoes on. So, the idea that they were out there basically, far from this tent without proper clothing and shoes on is nuts. So it's so easy for the mind to run wild and go, well, they must have been fleeing something, or there must have been some reason for them to do this, that they were terrified. But again, we just don't have enough information to really know for sure. I mean, I think it's an X factor. I think it's some cascade of little things that ultimately led to a bad situation. I mean, it could be something like it could be, this is probably not the case, but it could be a dare. It could be a game. It could have been something that they tried to do, who can run down to the trees and come back, and then a blinding storm came in and they all got kind of screwed. I mean, who knows? Or they could have been forced from that tent at gunpoint because they ran into someone that they shouldn't have, and I'm not sure we're ever going to know the answer to it. I think that, they say that no mystery stays unsolved forever. Well, some of them do, and I think in this case there might just not be enough data to really ever know for sure.
Well, let's jump. That's a great place to springboard into the Bermuda Triangle. I remember in the 70s going to Foley, Alabama. That's where I had my Bigfoot encounter at my grandparents'. But my grandmother and grandfather, I mean, they were very old, superstitious ways. They were terrified of the Bermuda Triangle. As a matter of fact, I remember at one point they had planned on going on a cruise that my uncle was going to pay for them until they found out that it went through the Bermuda Triangle. And here were two people legitimately superstitiously afraid and refused to take the cruise because it would go through the Devil's Triangle, as they kept referring to it. Mm-hmm. And I remember that having a strange impact on me at the time, and that there's just this place. And then, of course, you've got Leonard Nimoy and his TV show. And gosh, the name is escaping me right now. I feel like a goof.
In Search of, talking about it. Yeah. There was specials about it. I remember a movie called The Devil's Triangle about the weird shenanigans that took place there. And it really was just unsettling. Could there be this vortex on our planet where mysterious and magical things might actually happen? I've since gone through the Bermuda Triangle 4 times myself on cruises. And Tim and I will tell you, we had a very strange experience last year on the Jericho cruise when we did an intention experiment. Whilst in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle, we decided to try to have all of these, probably about 100, 120 people that were aboard the cruise do this intention experiment with us to try to make a UFO appear. And something appeared. And it tracked us and would dip down. And we had people that were on board that were, employees of the ship. And my son, who was in the Navy, and he goes, "Dad, this ship, we're on flat glass water here. There's no reason that light should be doing that. There's no reason it should be dancing around like that. This is something you'd see if we were rocking side to side and the horizon was changing." But we were watching strange phenomena while we were there in the Bermuda Triangle. So, that just adds to the mystery and allure of that topic. And then starting the show off back in 2006, one of our first interviews was with two gentlemen you're very familiar with and appeared on your Curse of the Bermuda Triangle special, Bruce Gernon and Rob McGregor. And hearing that story from a person who was actually there, this wasn't just, this ship vanished after radio transmission ceased or these planes disappeared, and this guy went through it. And I know you had a chance to really kind of dig deep and sit down with Bruce Gernon regarding this. I'd like to know, you've got a pretty good BS detector. Having a chance to talk to this guy and hear his story, what does it leave you feeling? Well, I think there's no doubt in my mind that Bruce Gernon really believed that he went through some vortex, off the coast of Florida. I mean, he's not. I don't think he's making that up. He was piloting a plane. There were 2 other people aboard. All 3 of them had this experience. He seems genuinely rattled by the fact that this thing happened to him. So my BS detector, I mean, I don't think he's making it up. Now, does that mean that he went through a vortex off the coast of Florida? No, I have no idea what happened to him. His story is insane. I mean, that's, I don't mean that as an insult to him. His story is nuts. I mean, when you listen to it, it just defies belief. I mean, it gets crazier and crazier and crazier. He talks about taking off from Bimini and flying in clear skies, and then, having these insane kind of lenticular cloud formations in front of him, and then that turning into a tunnel, and them flying through this tunnel, and the sort of lightning on the walls, and I mean, it turns into it sounds like a science fiction movie, and then they come out the other side of this tunnel, and he's effectively gone, 100. Plus hundreds of miles in 2-3 minutes, and we had to have been flying thousands of miles an hour to do that. So, I don't have a clue what happened to him. I wanted to hear his story because one of the things about the Bermuda Triangle, when you look into it more, is that it's a place that is famous for kind of 2 reasons. One, it's just sort of famous in a general way, right? Like it's just a zone, people know about it. It just has become part of the pop culture. It was a part of mariner lore long before it was a popular thing to be even called the Bermuda Triangle. It was known as the Devil's Triangle or the Hoodoo Triangle, dating back centuries. So it is a place that just generally has a kind of mystique about it. But it's also a place that has these famous individual particular stories. And there are a handful of them. Flight 19, there's this squadron that vanished into the triangle, stories like the Uss Cyclops, a huge ship that vanished, and stories like Bruce Gernon. Bruce Gernon's story of the man who flew through the triangle and made it out the other side but had this experience is a really famous tale. So I wanted to meet him because what you realize when you look into the Bermuda Triangle is it's kind of propped up by only a handful of really famous stories. And so I wanted to kind of dig into those stories to just sort of see what they revealed. In the case of Bruce, his story is incredible, but it is very much a personal account, right? We don't have radar of him vanishing. We don't have kind of, he has a gas receipt that shows that he had to put a lot less fuel into the plane than he should have, and that's his proof that the plane zipped through time. I mean, it's cool. He has the original receipt. I mean, it's amazing. But it's not, what we would call proof, right? So I don't know. I left his story kind of mesmerized because I definitely believed that he believed it.
And that's exactly how we felt going through this. But it was, he details in his book, The Fog, with Rob McGregor, the fact that, he was questioning every aspect of this and actually used, I think it was like a large dipstick to measure the amount of gas that was still in his gas tank. And it measured as though he had only made it halfway. So there were so many different elements of it that just don't seem to add up. Now, again, human nature is fallible. We can make mistakes. We can see one thing and perceive it another. So you're right. There is that aspect of his story, but the fact that, it wasn't just a lone guy in a plane having this experience. His father and I think a business associate was in the plane, all 3 of them witnessing this spiraling vortex tunnel that they were booking through, and knowing how they made it through. Because I remember asking Bruce, I'm like, well, Bruce, you're trying to get through this electronic fog, this tunnel. Are you maybe just flooring it a little faster than you normally would because you want to get through this thing? And maybe that explains. And like he explains to you and me, I would have to be going at about 2,000 miles an hour to get to the point I was, and my plane could top out at 200, and that was it. So to make it, that span of time in that short period is strange, but it's also strange to me that it just so happens to empty out directly over where he was going anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and look, this happened a long time ago, and so it's one of those things where, it just remains a really fascinating personal story. But that's what makes the Triangle so interesting, is that there are a lot of people who have those stories. To those who think the Triangle is nothing but superstition, and I might be in that group, by the way, but to people who say that, believers would say, yeah, but look at all these crazy disappearances. Look at all these planes and ships that have vanished inside the Triangle without a trace. And so that's really where it gets its mystique from real disappearances, and from people like Bruce Gernon, who have a story to tell that defies that really kind of defies understanding.
Now, you brought up so many of the other aspects, the USS Cyclops, the Flight 19, and its subsequent search and rescue plane that also vanished. But there were a lot of different aspects to the story that you examine. And first of all, just kind of walk us through the triangle theory. What it starts at the tip of Miami, and it goes off to San Juan, Puerto Rico in one direction, off to Bermuda in the other direction, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that so it's a huge area of ocean, right? You're talking about the edge of the United States there in Florida. It's about 500,000 square miles of ocean in the North Atlantic there. I think it became famous originally from sailors that were traveling through that area, particularly because of Bermuda, and because Bermuda it's just surrounded by this insane reef system. And so you have to remember, like, not only is this part of the Atlantic have a lot of shallow areas and sandbars and extensive reefs, but this is an area that has some of the roughest weather in the world, right? This is Hurricane Alley. This is like every year we get horrible storms coming through this sector of the Atlantic. So this is a place that mariners had a healthy fear of dating way back, right? They used to call it the Devil's Triangle or the Hoodoo Triangle, and they referred to the area around Bermuda as like the Devil's Isle. This was a dangerous place. So I think that if you look at the earliest origins of it, there really are kind of good reasons to be scared of this area. They have nothing to do with supernatural hocus pocus anything, right? It's just an area that is undoubtedly dangerous. And in the early days of America, there were some, fascinating stories. A ship that was headed to resupply one of the early colonies crashed in Bermuda, and that became one of the earliest populations of people to live there. And Shakespeare's play, The Tempest, it was actually, people think, based on that event, which is kind of amazing. So this is a story that dates, way back centuries. It doesn't really become named the Bermuda Triangle until this magazine article in the 70s gives it that name, and how those boundaries were picked of San Juan and Miami and Bermuda, that's a little unclear. It's just over time it went from just the waters around Bermuda to being this whole area in between those 3 points. So that's kind of where it got its start, and really it's one of these legends that you can totally understand how it got fueled originally, because there are real disappearances happening here. I mean, if you were in storm season having to pass through this area as a sailor, I think you have good reason to be scared.
And you said that this even dates back to as far as the ocean voyage of Columbus in 1492.
That's right. Yeah, on Columbus's first voyage to the New World, the so-called New World, he supposedly saw strange lights in this area. So he's really credited as the first person to have an encounter in the Bermuda Triangle. He notes in his log these strange kind of hovering lights on the horizon around the area of the Bermuda Triangle. So, this is a story that goes all the way back to the end of the 16th century.
All right, well, let's examine that for just a few seconds here. I know this isn't something that you're able to necessarily dig too deeply in on the episode. But do we know of any weather phenomena or things that would cause these lights to appear in the skies in 1492 while Columbus is sailing?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is weird weather, in the Triangle. I mean, we can't deny that. I mean, even just in the time that we were there filming, we saw incredible lightning storms. We got caught in bad weather while filming multiple times during the show, and we even saw a water spout, which is something that you don't see every day, kind of almost like a tornado over the sea. So, look, this is this part of the world gets insane thunderstorms. There are a lot of weird. So, it's not impossible that what Columbus witnessed was some sort of natural phenomenon there. In his log, I'm just looking up Columbus's log. He says a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana saw. Let's see. There seemed to be a light, and for him to look, and thus he did not saw it. Calculated that. I'm just looking in the log to see what it says. They basically saw these strange lights. And they don't know what it was. It happened shortly before they landed near San Salvador. They saw these strange lights. So who knows?
Right. Those are the different aspects that really kind of surprised me. People will say ball lightning. I think what ball lightning looks like. Even at that time, it would have been something that they would have described. In more specific terms other than just lights hovering, or there would have been a storm or something. And you're right, blowing, there's a lot of really strange weather that takes place. In this last trip we just made through the Bermuda Triangle, the water was insanely crazy. It was a really rough cruise for part of it. And they had to keep cycling out to try to avoid this weather that would suddenly appear. And they were telling us on board that they were surprised by what was going on, because usually you can track and know what you're about to get into, but these sudden bursts would just suddenly show up, and the water was so choppy. And in a huge cruise ship, you could, it was still intimidating as hell to see the waves. And you're like, how safe are we out here? When you suddenly realize there's no land in sight, right? The vulnerability of what you are and where you are is pretty striking.
Right.
And the movie Titanic did nothing to help anybody feel any better about being out there. So, I can understand all of these different philosophies and the psychologies of being out there, and especially at night, seeing things in the night sky, not sure exactly what it is you're experiencing or what's happening. So I could see how a lot of superstitions could build from this. If we look globally, are there other places, like if I were to point to any specific spot on the map, could we probably find that there's just as many disappearances and vanishings or strange phenomena that takes place over other parts of the ocean that just doesn't have the same press agent as the Bermuda Triangle?
Right, and that's the big question, right? Is that does the data show that there is anything here that is unique to just here and not anywhere else? And the answer is there are definitely more ships and planes that disappear in the Bermuda Triangle than certain other parts of the ocean, but that's only because perhaps this is a really popular shipping lane, right? I mean, this is a high traffic area. So there are other parts of the Atlantic where you wouldn't see the same number of disappearances, but you also don't have nearly the same amount of boat or air traffic. So if you compare it to other heavily trafficked parts of the world's oceans, statistically speaking, it's kind of average. Like there are the same amount of ships that go missing in other parts of the world that have rough weather that are heavily trafficked. So in that sense, it may not be that unique. I think it's because some of the particular stories of the Triangle are so weird. That the ships like the Cyclops, these massive vessels that have gone missing, or Flight 19, which would be weird anywhere, an entire squadron of planes vanishing all at once. So I think it's the combination of the old lore about the Devil's Triangle combined with some of these, legitimately weird cases has really given it maybe more of a claim to fame than it really earned.
You're right. When people start building a legend and lore about it and becomes something of the global consciousness because people are talking about it and giving it that detailing, it certainly becomes more effectual in the legend category.
Totally.
I wonder, though, why it doesn't jump out more in other areas as it does in this specific region. And if it's so concentrated, I mean, it's still a vast area, but it still seems like if it's so concentrated, if you drop that sonar dolphin behind your ship driving through there, you should be picking up debris fields for miles.
Well, it is a lot of ocean. I think that's the important point that you made. It's still a huge area. I mean, there's probably more shipwrecks in the Mediterranean than there are in the Bermuda Triangle, because again, you've got another area that's just for thousands of years has been a shipping lane for boats crossing back and forth through the Mediterranean. But it's a big ocean, and when a ship seems huge until you put it in the context of 500,000 square miles of ocean, and then it's literally the head of a pin. So even all that debris from that ship, you just have to be right on top of that debris field in order to see anything. And there are areas of the Bermuda Triangle that are really, really deep. And so ships like the Cyclops, which have never been found, not a trace of it's ever been found, are probably sitting in really deep water.
We've got, you've got James Cameron, who was able to document the Titanic better than anybody with all of the deep sea diving information that he's got and the tools that his company helped make. I wonder why there hasn't been a better investigation of the Bermuda Triangle, A, for its ties to Atlantis and the fact that so many people are fascinated by that. B, just to try to get some closure on these areas. We've got these craft now that can do deep sea. I understand there's a certain amount of money behind it, but I would guess there's got to be a lot of money in marketing what we find at the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle. People would be fascinated by that.
I think they would be fascinated by it. I mean, this kind of deep sea exploration it's one of those things where it's kind of right at our fingertips and also still pretty far out of reach, because the logistics, the cost is still astronomical. I mean, even with some of the incredible technology that has come forward over the last few years, these autonomous sonar vehicles in particular that can kind of fly around down there on their own, it still requires a huge amount of manpower, a huge amount of commitment at sea. I mean, one of the shows we did this year that was really eye-opening for me was the story of an airplane that went missing in Lake Michigan. It was an old Northwest Airlines flight, and it was, when it crashed in 1959, the largest loss of life for a U.S. plane in history at that point. It was a huge story. And everybody on board perished, and the plane vanished off the face of the earth. It's never been found. And we went and worked with this woman who has been combing this corner of Lake Michigan for over a decade, trying to find this plane. And I went out there with her, and we looked at the maps, and we looked at all the lanes that they had been, kind of mowing with their boat with the sonar, and we added to that search. But what you realize is that even something as big as a commercial airliner, it's just a needle in a haystack. We just don't have that technology yet where, say, a satellite from space could look down at a body of water and see down to the bottom. You still have to run over it. And if you miss it by an inch, sometimes you don't see it. And then you sort of think, okay, we have all this data, and where is it? And maybe it was just 3 feet to the left, And so when you get into really deep places, or you get into places where weather conditions aren't great, I mean, a lot of just trying to film out in the Bermuda Triangle to make our show, we had days where it was like, nope, we can't go to sea. Can't go to sea today. Can't go to sea today. Another day down, another day waiting. These kind of efforts, like finding the Cyclops, I mean, the Cyclops was a coal-carrying vessel. It was carrying, like, manganese ore at the time. There's no sort of financial value to finding it, and you would just have to expend an enormous amount of money to do it. And there are people who, this is like a personal passion. Clive Cussler, who just passed away, Cussler had made a ton of money as an author and spent a lot of the money that he made locating shipwrecks. Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, has done the same thing. But this becomes like a pet project for billionaires at a certain point, because there's not enough science to it, or kind of or financial reason to do it, other than just the curiosity of solving these puzzles, which is huge. And I think so many people, myself included, are super interested in it. But man, it is not cheap or easy.
Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We've got more to discuss. The curse of the Bermuda Triangle. Josh Gates is our host as we pilot our way through this treacherous part of the water. We'll be back with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio.
This message brought to you by FEMA. Home fires occur most often in winter. Keep anything that can catch fire at least 3 feet from heating equipment. And never use an oven to heat your home. Stay in the kitchen when frying, grilling, or broiling food. Turn space heaters off when you leave the room or go to bed. Make sure all vents are clear of snow and ice to allow carbon monoxide to vent outside. Have your furnace, heating system, and chimneys serviced each year by a qualified professional. Learn more at www.usfa.fema.gov.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
All right, don't forget, set your DVRs, folks, because if you've missed any of the new season of Expedition Unknown, you can always check it out on the Discovery Channel or Discovery Go app and watch a program. But make sure that you do watch these episodes, recycle back. You've got some time, and we're going to talk more about the curse of the Bermuda Triangle. But Josh, you're doing something pretty cool right now, actually kind of an interactive version of your show as you're reviewing these past episodes. Is that right?
Oh, I was like, what am I doing right now? I'm just sitting in my underwear. Josh, you're doing something pretty cool right now. You're sitting in your underwear in your house like everybody else. Yeah, look, these are very unprecedented times, and so we're all kind of scrambling to keep ourselves busy and to figure out what the new normal is here. And, one of the things that I think I wanted to make sure of is that people kind of still, even though we're staying indoors and we're sheltering with our family and all that we still have this, spirit of adventure. And so on Wednesday nights, I've been hosting a couple of classic episodes of Expedition Unknown on Discovery at 8 and 9. They have a new series running called Legends of the Wild at 10. So I've been hosting that whole night, and then I've been doing kind of a mini talk show from my home office here after that. So we did that last week, and people really seem to enjoy it. We're going to be doing it again this Wednesday night and next week as well. So, it's a fun way to kind of stay connected with folks and to remind them that there is a big, wide world out there waiting for us that we're going to get back to here sooner than later, I'm sure, and to be able to kind of take folks on an adventure while they're stuck at home.
Excellent. So check it out, Discovery Channel. And again, folks, do me a favor. If you DVR these episodes, watch them within the first 2 to 3 days so that the ratings count. I know it sounds goofy and petty, but it really does help, and it keeps these shows on the air when the advertisers and the ratings people see that people are actively watching the programs immediately after they're recorded. It's always best, of course, to watch them live. That helps the TV series the most, but if you could try to watch these shows within 2 to 3 days of the time you record them on your DVR, that will certainly help out considerably. We're talking about the curse of the Bermuda Triangle and Josh Gates's 2-part series that really took a deep dive, if you will, into understanding some of the different phenomena, the cases, the stories that had taken place there. Bruce Gernon talks about this electronic fog, and we touched upon that a little bit, this strange cloud fog that seems to disrupt electronics. In some of the other instances and cases that have been reported when there's been strange anomalies with navigational gear, do we see that some of these reports are coming from fog banks as well? Is there anything else that could tie to Bruce Gernon's theory?
I don't know. Bruce's story it doesn't stand alone. There are other people who have certainly been caught in weird cloud formations and weather, but the most common thing that you hear from the Triangle is some sort of electromagnetic anomaly, compasses malfunctioning, compasses going haywire. That tends to be the thing that we hear more than anything else, and that can happen in stormy weather, or, anecdotally, people have said it happens under clear skies. You just be sailing in the triangle, and suddenly your compass goes haywire. So that's the story that you tend to hear more often than not.
Well, I love the fact that not only do you glide across the water, you fly in a plane through that trail site of Flight 19 and their path, but you also take the expedition above the Earth with a couple of gentlemen to try to get some data information and record what is actually going on above that area. What, if anything, did you find was conclusive or fascinating about that, and was it surprising to you?
Well, I think what was surprising to me is that not a lot of work had really been done atmospherically there to sort of see if, in fact, there is anything to these stories. So we worked with a group of scientists, and we created a weather balloon to test for electromagnetic disturbances and radiation and things like that. And so it was just, first of all, it was a wild experiment trying to launch a balloon out in the Bermuda Triangle and then recover it. I had no faith in these two guys, I will fully admit. They were awesome. I should have had complete faith in them, but they had never launched a balloon like this over the water. So they both nervously were like, look, like we have a projection of where it's going to come down, because when you send these balloons up, it takes an enormous amount of math to figure out where it's going to go, because the wind might be blowing east down where you are, but then you get up 10,000 feet and it's blowing the other way, and you're talking about having to send a balloon up to the edge of space that's unpiloted. It's just floating. It goes up 100,000 feet. It pops, and then a parachute carries the payload back down to the ocean. So I just thought, well, this is going to be a huge waste of time. Like, we are never going to find this box with this stuff in it. And I mean, we damn near caught the thing in our arms. It was unbelievable. We were right on top of it. Their calculations were dead on. And the data was really interesting. It was almost entirely normal, except there was one really wild spike in the middle of the balloon's flight. A huge spike in electromagnetic interference and a huge spike in radiation. My favorite part about this is it drove these two scientists nuts, because they didn't want to say, yeah, there's anything weird going on in the Bermuda Triangle, right? They don't believe that. So they had this piece of data that they didn't like because it wasn't really behaving right, and it wasn't just one instrument that recorded it; it was two, and so that bothered them even more. But it's not conclusive. I mean, it was a great start and a great way to say, well, maybe we should do more of these experiments to see if this is a pattern that we can figure out, or if this is just an anomalous reading. And so who knows? Maybe throwing a few more balloons up there before long to see if we can figure out a way to get more data.
Wouldn't it, and this came to mind at the time, and I don't recall you talking about it on the show, but, we do have solar flares and things that take place. Wouldn't that possibly, especially in the higher atmosphere like that, create a magnetic disturbance that might have been picked up by these sensitive tools?
Yeah, it was just such a brief blip. It was a really quick thing. It didn't seem to align to any sort of known event that might happen there. But again, it's one of those things where it is just so not conclusive. It's just a little piece of data, so it needs to be looked at in a much bigger context. So, but that's great. I mean, that's all the more reason to get out there and do more work and see if there's anything really going on there. That's the fun of it.
So you've got the electronic fog, the electromagnetic anomalies that are known to happen there. You've got the storms, which of course have been well documented. The belief that there might be aliens involved. When do we start to see that tie to the area? That it's obviously Spielberg had a nice play on that in the beginning of Close Encounters of the Third Kind by having the mysterious Flight 19 from World War II suddenly reappear.
Yeah, there's actually a whole bunch of ships from the Cotopaxi, which is another missing ship in the Bermuda Triangle, also appears in Close Encounters. That's the weird thing about the Bermuda Triangle, is that when you trace its history, in the beginning you're like, okay, I get this. This is a place with a lot of nasty reefs, a lot of mariners coming through here, a lot of ships are getting sunk in these terrible storms. I totally get why this place has a nasty reputation. then you kind of get why it becomes a pop culture thing too. It's just you have these stories like Flight 19 that are so ripe for people like Spielberg to use in movies like Close Encounters. They just lend themselves to these kind of mysteries. But this question of aliens and Atlantis and like where that really comes from is kind of muddy. It's just at a certain point the triangle becomes like a catch-all for any weirdness. It's no longer just compasses that malfunction. It's no longer just magnetic disturbances. It's Atlanteans and it's aliens and it's time vortexes and it's all that stuff. And the weird thing about like the Atlantis angle, for instance, is that you can never get a clear answer out of anybody how the triangle even relates to Atlantis. Even if that's like, to me, as cuckoo as it gets, but it's like you say to somebody like, well, okay, how is it related to Atlantis? Is it that Atlantis was in the triangle and the triangle's somehow being powered by the power of Atlantis? Is Atlantis still up and running in this scenario? Like, it's like nobody can articulate what they really think, just that it has something to do with Atlantis. Some people believe that out near the island of Bimini is where Atlantis was supposed to be, right? And they think that because there are these rock formations out there called the Bimini Road, and maybe that's where this mythical city was supposed to be. But then you kind of go, okay, let's just skip over that part. Why does it make the triangle do weird things? Are you saying that there's like an underwater city powered up here that's snaring planes and ships? And nobody really seems to have an answer to that. So it's like it just became a kind of catch-all for weird stuff.
So the Atlantean version, and I thought that was strange too. How close is that to Greece that Plato would think that right off the coast of Bimini, these underwater beings, or I guess it wasn't underwater at that time, but that they would have come forth to attack Greece?
You just have to start with. You can kind of chop it down a few different ways. You can start by just with the fact that Plato wasn't really describing a real place, right? It was part of a philosophical treaty and described a kind of a lesson about this naval power that attacked Athens, and he said they were beyond the Pillar of Hercules. And so where is that? Some people have said, it's the Strait of Gibraltar, and so it's out in the Atlantic somewhere. But I think we can be sure that there was not an advanced race of people living in the Bahamas that were attacking ancient Athens, So, it's just one of those things that over time, it's a little bit like, how when like a place has what's another good corollary for this? Like whenever a place is deemed to be kind of Stonehenge, right? Whenever a place is deemed to be spiritual. So like Stonehenge might have, been a calendar. It might have been associated with the solstice. It might have been a burial area. But you go there and you see hippies and crystals and pyramids, and like the minute that a place kind of gets a reputation, it kind of becomes a magnet for other people to kind of, paste on their own beliefs about spiritual things. So the same thing is true with Atlantis. With the triangle. Like as soon as it gets a reputation as a place that's mysterious, suddenly it's connected to every other weird, mysterious place.
Gotcha. I was just wondering what that was. Now I know that there was one aspect that they had talked about for quite a while, that there are these underwater pockets of gas that are released from the tectonic plates below the ocean. And I remember watching a special on this that they would show these little bloops of gas would come up and would quickly roll a ship and disrupt planes and could cause them to fall.
It's a really interesting theory, this sort of methane hydrate vent stuff. It's an interesting theory. They've tried to demonstrate it sinking ships. Practically speaking, like they've on TV, there have been a number of times where they've tried to sink a boat with it. And you can do it, but it's really hard. And you have to have a really concentrated burst in a really concentrated column in order to pull it off. So I think the idea that this is like some regular thing that's taking ships down, we would have to assume that we would be seeing these huge bursts all the time, right? I mean, we would have to be seeing them all the time in order to believe that just in some random part of the ocean, one of these things could just hit a ship, or hit all of these ships that have sank in the triangle. So that's one of those theories that is, to me, there's just not enough heat on that fire. I mean, I just don't think that there's any good evidence that that's happening.
All right. Yeah. Now, you also discussed, though, the rogue wave category.
Yeah, and that I think is a lot more possible.
Right. And you
now
guys
rogue waves
really,
are interesting.
really...
People really didn't even know that rogue waves were a real thing until relatively recently. They were like a legendary thing that sailors had talked about for centuries, and scientists had always kind of thought that they were apocryphal, that they weren't real. And now we are able to demonstrate them. They've been observed both directly and by satellite. There have been waves now near 100 feet that have been measured out in the open ocean. So, this is a real thing. And the conditions in the Bermuda Triangle are favorable for rogue waves to form. The combination of storms and the reef systems there, it is possible to generate these mega waves. These are basically just what for people listening who don't know what they are, it's exactly what it sounds like, a rogue wave, just a weird one-off wave that can just come out of nowhere and broadside a ship. So that's certainly a possibility for some of the cases in the Bermuda Triangle. Like, we have ships that have been sailing in all kinds of weather out there. And in the case of the Uss Cyclops, this super famous ship that vanished without a trace, it may well be that it was hit by one of these waves. It was really not a very stable ship. And so in really bad seas, if it got broadsided, and we know that it was sailing with a damaged engine, so if it managed to get its nose out of the waves and was sideways to a wave, it could certainly have been rolled and sank. I think that's probably the most likely thing that happened to it.
Right, and watching you guys do a really interesting experiment. I don't want to give much away because I'd like people to watch it, but you do an interesting experiment. Just shows how this can affect and impact different craft out there, and certainly lends itself to probably one of the most believable aspects. And having been out on the sea numerous times now and seen from a very safe, high vantage point aboard a cruise ship how high some of these waves can get, you could understand that a regular ship that was just delivering items or was out there and wasn't built for comfort and luxury like these luxury liners are, could have been easily overturned or succumbed to this weather.
Totally. And one of the things for me is that I think there's a lot of natural or kind of real world explanations for a lot of the events of the Triangle. And to me, that doesn't diminish the mystery at all. The USS Cyclops is a super intriguing story of a ship that vanished without a trace. I mean, they didn't find a seat cushion from this thing, right? And it was, I think it actually remains the largest non-combat loss of life for the U.S. Navy. This ship, there were over 300 people, 306 people died on this vessel. And so I think it sank for reasons that we can totally understand. I think it either got hit by a wave or I think its own kind of engineering and structural deficiencies did it in. But the fact is, we've never found that ship. So out there somewhere in the deep water of the Bermuda Triangle, the USS Cyclops is waiting to be rediscovered. So for me, when it comes to things like the Triangle, even if you don't believe that some of these things were done in by supernatural elements, that doesn't diminish anything for me, because there's a real mystery here that is really tantalizing, which is that ship is, at this moment, it's sitting there waiting to be found.
And you and your team do go out, and again, this is something I don't want to give away. Watch this special because the team goes out and they do locate something really fascinating during his expedition. Couple of things, though. I got to tell you, I love that you always hold the show to such high standards. You don't hire actors to be these talking heads. At least I didn't think so until I saw you go meet with, and I'm doing air quotes here, Dr. Brian House. Come on.
Yes.
Peter Capaldi. How did you get Peter Capaldi to pretend to be Dr. Brian House?
He does look like him, doesn't he?
Right, it's uncanny. As soon as he popped up, I'm like, I knew it. Josh Gates is a time traveler. He's hanging out with the doctor. It was uncanny how much that guy looked like Peter Capaldi.
He does look like Peter Capaldi now that you say that.
For people that are not nerds, that's Doctor Who. He was the one of the last doctors that portrayed the character. Here's the other strange mystery.
I also thought, by the way, can I just say while we're talking about Dr. I don't know why we're just now we're just going to compare this guy. Dr. Brian House was the scientist that we met on the show. Right. He reminded me of the guy who played the villain in Ghost.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah, you're right. I can totally see that as well. But I guess just
whose name I am Googling, and he is an actor named, I don't know. But I think he looks more like him than Peter Capaldi.
I don't know. This guy with the gray hair and how slight he was.
Tony Goldwyn.
Yes.
Tony Goldwyn was the actor.
I don't remember him well.
Yeah. Tony Goldwyn, who is still with us, and in case you're interested as to what Tony Goldwyn's been up to lately, he was in Divergent. He was in Divergent, and anyway, he was the bad guy in Ghost. I don't want to spoil it for you if you never saw Ghost, but he was the bad guy.
Always bringing new information. Here was another part of the real mystery for me regarding the show. When you were out tracing and looking for the balloon that had gone up that you guys sent up to get all the transponder information from, you and your crew go underneath some low bridges. The real mystery to me is, why did you duck every time you went under a bridge that had a clearance of, at least 10 to 12 feet over your head?
Well, because I'm not a smart man. And, it's like a reflex. You just sort of...
You were the only one.
I don't know.
Everybody on the ship was fine, but as soon as you'd go under that, you'd duck. And I was like, what is he afraid of? What does he see that we don't see?
I'm afraid of hitting a bridge at 40 miles an hour, mostly.
Yeah. Well, I get maybe you're thinking it's going to go like airborne, like a James Bond movie. I can understand.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I was trying to be cautious.
Let's Flight 19 is one of the more fascinating stories from the Bermuda Triangle. Can you give us kind of the rundown? We talked about the Cyclops from 1918, this ship that, as you re-examine it, was not really structurally sound for what it was going to do, and was, not prepared for these rogue waves that we didn't know about at that time. But Flight 19, to me, has always stood out as a really strange thing, and I'll have you tell the story, and then I'll explain why I found it so bizarre. But please, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Flight 19 is super weird. Happened in 1945. The war was over. This was in December of 45, but they were still training airmen in Florida. And so these were Grumman TBM Avengers. These were like one of the bread and butter fighter planes of World War II. And so these 5 planes took off from a naval air station in Fort Lauderdale, and these planes each could hold 3 people. There was like a pilot, and then a person behind him, and then there was a gunner down at the bottom. So there were 14 people between these 5 planes that went out there, and they were on a training mission. And the idea is they were going to take off from Fort Lauderdale. They were going to fly east out to a place called Hen and Chicken Shoals, and they were doing like a dummy bombing run. And then they were going to circle north, and then they were going to take a hook a left, and then go back west and land at Fort Lauderdale. Totally, common everyday training exercise for these guys. They had an experienced training pilot at leading the group, and they went out there. They appeared to drop the dummy bombs on Hen and Chicken Shoals, and then they never returned. They became disoriented. They couldn't figure out where they were, and they, this is before like really sophisticated radar tracking, and so they couldn't just sort of GPS their way home. But these guys got hopelessly turned around out there, and none of the planes returned. All 5 of them vanished. None of the planes have ever been found. And then immediately after that, a big flying boat, this Martin Mariner plane, was dispatched, search and rescue plane, to go find them. And there were 13 crew members aboard that plane, and that plane also vanished without a trace, although there is evidence that it may have exploded midair. But it vanished, and so you're talking about, in the span of a couple of hours, 27 men went missing on this mission and subsequent rescue attempt. So a super tragic story, but also one of the hallmark cases of the Bermuda Triangle because it is so weird, and that's why Spielberg included it in Close Encounters, in that famous scene in the desert where they're reading the serial numbers off the plane. This is one of the weirdest stories in the history of the Triangle, and it is weird. No doubt about it.
I remember speaking to a guest who talked me through it. As I said, they're going through this. You've got this flight instructor pilot that's leading the crusade. He seems to be getting more agitated and disoriented. I asked why, it seemed like some of the other pilots knew that they were going in the wrong direction. Why didn't somebody just veer off? And the response to me at that time was because they were part of a formation. They had to say it. But if you know you're going possibly to your death and going to have to ditch out, why wouldn't you break from that and try to get, some of them to come with you? And that's always been kind of strange to me that you just, I don't know what that says about our military, that we will just literally fly blind and follow what we're told to do, even though it may seem that we're the person in charge is hopelessly lost.
I mean, I think that it may be that they were all hopelessly lost, and there must have been some comfort in trying to stay together in a formation. They may have. These were students. This was a training mission for them. They may well have thought that Powers, who is the guy leading it, that they were going to be okay. That they were going to kind of figure out how to get home. I think it's probably the case that they just sort of thought, okay, we're disoriented and we're going to figure out where we are and we're going to get back, and that just didn't happen.
Yeah, that was so distressing. But how unusual is it?
Sorry, Taylor was the guy in charge, not Powers. Taylor was the guy in charge, and Taylor gets confused as to where he is, and then we hear one of the students who's Powers, saying that they don't know where they are. What's weird to me is each of these planes has 2 compasses in it. So between these 5 planes, there are 10 compasses. So when at a certain point, they're asking for compass readings, and they're saying we don't know where we are. We're turned around, and someone says the compasses are out. I mean, this is super weird, right? 10 compasses can't fail. 2 compasses failing would be kind of beyond, something that you would think could happen. So the fact that between these 10 compasses they couldn't get their bearings is really strange.
Now, you've got that takeoff, the disappearance, no wreckage found ever, and then you've got the flight that goes out after them to try to locate them.
That was a little less mysterious to me. The Martin Mariner, if you Google it and look it up, it's one of these real weird look. It's like a plane that you wouldn't get in if I asked you to fly in it. It is a super strange looking flying boat. It's got these weird pontoons under the wings, and it was notorious for being a dangerous plane. People referred to it as like a tinderbox. And it took off, and by the time it took off to go rescue these guys, it was really, really bad weather. So the loss of the Mariner to me is less mysterious, and there is, as I said, there's evidence that it exploded midair. There was another vessel that saw something, fire in the sky kind of thing, and went and even saw, I think, some wreckage on the surface of the ocean. But ultimately, we don't know exactly where they were when they saw that. I think there's sort of a general idea where they were, but I think the Mariner took off in bad weather and had some sort of internal failure.
And that was it. But it's you got to admit the timing on it is very unusual. That they're on the heels of this missing group, and then boom, it explodes midair and it goes down. It just sounds so Hollywood movie.
Totally. I mean, the whole story of Flight 19 is just out of a movie. I mean, it really is. It's like, you just kind of can't believe. And by the way, like, I'm not a pilot, and I know that it is a real thing to get turned around in the air, and I know that can happen. But when you look at what these guys were trying to do, it doesn't get much simpler than this, right? They flew east, almost due east for X amount of time, made this bombing run, had to then hook a left and turn north, hook another left and go west. And it's all Florida on the west. I mean, if you're flying west, you're going to hit Florida. I mean, that's it. But I think what happened is that they overshot that first turn, and then they overshot that second turn, and all he needed to do was point those planes west. Even if they just made it over some other part of Florida and had to ditch in the swamps or ditch in another town, all they had to do was just go west. And so it does sort of defy belief why, with 10 compasses aboard, these guys didn't just do that. And in fact, I think they ultimately did. They just did it too late, and they didn't have enough fuel to make it back.
You're a pilot yourself, and I know that you're more skeptical of the supernatural or the anomalous features of the Bermuda Triangle, but what was it like to actually be in the plane following that flight pattern yourself? Was there kind of a cold chill up and down your spine?
Big time, because, we were up there with a really experienced former commercial pilot who was leading us as we did the sort of turn by turn. And when you look out and, you're out in this part of, you are kind of around the scattered keys of Bermuda, but of the Bahamas there, but mostly you see nothing but ocean. And so when you're flying there and you sort of imagine, okay, it's getting late in the day, it's getting dark, there's bad weather rolling in, there's a certain point where these guys knew they were going to be floating in the ocean and or crashing into the ocean in these planes. They just knew. So that makes your blood run cold, because you just realize that at a certain point, these kids, they were young kids, they knew these planes were not going to get back.
Oof. And then I know you do a lot of dives, and you get to see some of the most pristine waters on the planet and swim in this environment. And that's part of why I love your show so much, is it gives those of us that don't get a chance to see all these places this kind of unfettered access to go along with you and experience this. But to be in the Bermuda Triangle, is there kind of an eerie sense when you're diving in that area, not sure exactly what phenomena is causing this? Is it gas pockets? Is it electromagnetic frequency? Is it giant killer squid? What the hell is taking place? What's that like for us? Walk it through to actually enter that water and be going down looking for wreckage.
I have to say, like in Bimini, which is where this supposed Bimini Road is, these rock formations that are meant to be some sort of a paved structure down there, I just thought it was a blast, because it was beautiful, crystal clear water. I mean, you could see to infinity underwater. And, I've done some beautiful diving, and I've done some of the worst diving in the world. I mean, I've been in conditions that are, negative visibility, muddy rivers and horrible snake-infested swamps, and you name it. So any day that I can get in the water and actually see my hand in front of my face is always a treat. So in Bimini, I actually just was struck by how beautiful it was. And how peaceful the reefs were there, and how the rock formations there, which I don't think are part of Atlantis, were beautiful. Looking for the wreckage out in open water, definitely a little spookier. Anytime you're just diving in deep open water, you're just kind of descending through this infinite kind of blue water column. You certainly feel very small. You certainly are kind of, anything could kind of come cruising by, and it would be, alarming. But to be down there, and again, as you said, we want folks to watch the episode who haven't seen it, but to come across wreckage on this otherwise sandy bottom and to find something that cascaded all the way down here to the bottom of the ocean is, it's haunting, but it's also really exciting, because again, like the Cyclops, as I said, just sitting in that deep water, waiting, having a moment where you come up against something and you see something, that's kind of advancing that story of that thing that's been on hold, since it went in the water. So, for me, yeah, a little eerie, but also really thrilling.
Out of, you've had a chance to examine the afterlife. You've had a chance to examine Yeti, the Bermuda Triangle, UFOs. If you examine all of these different topics and look at them right now, which one stands out to you the most as being the most unusual phenomena?
Well, the afterlife is sort of its own category, of just, that's just the biggest mystery of all, right? So, I'm really fascinated by, it's funny. It's sort of changed over time. Like, I used to be much more fascinated by the kind of fringier stories of the cryptozoological mysteries and things like that. I tend to be more excited now by mysteries where there is something really tangible there. Lost cities, lost treasures. I'm obsessed with the Maya world down in Central America, and we helped image part of a lost city down there a few years ago, and I'm excited to get back and explore more there. Places where, at this moment, as we sit here in the comfort of our homes, there are jungle-covered temples out there. There are buried treasures and archaeological wonders. Those are the things that really excite me. I love legends and stories that are tinged with mythology. Like, I love the Yeti. I just love the folklore of it. I just think it's awesome. But I'm less kind of driven to go, find the Yeti living up in a high cave than I am trying to go look for some of these just incredible archaeological wonders that are out there waiting for us still.
With that said, we're in a really uncharted territory right now on our planet.
Yeah.
With what's going on. They say waterways are clearing up, skies are clearing up, pollution is being reduced considerably. Do you think that we might be able to uncover some really fascinating things if the waterways have cleared up, if all this pollution has subsided, or at least 90% of it over the next 60 to 90 days? Will there be some new things that reveal themselves?
It's a really interesting question. I actually hadn't given that much thought. Maybe, like they're saying in Venice, the canals are crystal clear. If you've seen photos from Venice, Italy, that you can see down into the canals and see all this sort of subterranean structure down there that hasn't been seen by people in forever, because the canals are always kind of silted up and muddied over. So you never know what's going to be revealed. I think that is a real possibility. I also just think that one of the real lessons that we're going to learn on the other side of this experience is that we are all so deeply connected. Air travel in particular means that borders don't really exist. They don't exist for viruses especially. And so we have to really remember that we're all kind of a big community of people here. And so I hope that we're able to positively kind of employ that when all this is done, to remember that we have to really look out for each other. These markets in China that shouldn't have been operating, that where this virus likely came from, we have to do a better job at shutting things like that down. But we also have to do a better job at I think, looking out for each other and realizing that different cultures around the world, different people around the world, it's not some other place. We are all totally in this together, as we are seeing, in these weeks, that this is something, that is going to cross borders without caring at all. And the same is true for nuclear weapons and things like that. We really have a responsibility, I think, to think really globally. And I think that this event is going to hopefully, help us to understand that we need to look outward a lot more and for our own safety, but for everybody's safety.
Gates, it's always a pleasure connecting with you, man, and I look forward to the day when things are cleared up and we can shake hands and hug and have a drink together at one of these conventions. So keep yourself safe.
Having a drink together. Isn't it so weird that just in a matter of weeks, it seems like all the things that we've taken for granted, just the ability to go out and hang out and have a meal and all that stuff. So I think we're all going to be a lot more appreciative when all this is done of the little things. So I look forward to that as well, getting together and having a drink.
No doubt, buddy. Thank you very much. Thank you all for tuning in, making us a part of your world. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Josh Gates as much as I did. Expedition Unknown, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. on the Discovery Channel. Remember, Josh is doing some programming right now, so you can continue to keep up with him and what's going on. We've got a link up for the Expedition Unknown website and to Josh Gates' website on today's program, so check that out. We'll be back Tuesday, another brand new edition of the Best in True Crime Tuesday from Darkness Radio, and then we'll be back again with you next weekend with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. For Tim Dennis, I'm Dave Schrader. You've been listening to Darkness Radio.